Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Grow Through It podcast. My name is Julia, and today I'm going to share with you all the books I read this year. I'll share my honest opinion on each book and my takeaways. These are all personal development, business, or spiritual books. Some I would highly recommend, and others maybe not. I am actually sick today, but I still wanted to get this episode out, so hopefully I don't sound too bad. I will edit out all the coughs. I'm also currently sitting here with my new heating pad I got from my friend Amy. It's one of the ones where it ties around your waist and goes over your shoulders for your neck too. So I'm nice and cozy today and downing all the vitamins so I get better quickly. I haven't been sick like this in a really long time, but I'm just thankful it's happening now and not at Christmas or my birthday like it usually does. So anyways, before I get into all the books I read this year, I just want to talk a little bit about why reading is so important and how it's changed my life. For as long as I can remember, I've always loved reading books. I read a lot when I was younger, but it wasn't until a few years ago when I started reading personal development books. These books have helped me heal and understand my trauma, helped me become more confident, taught me many lessons, opened my eyes to new information and insights, and motivated and inspired me. Before I began my personal development journey, I was extremely shy, had no self-esteem, didn't think I was capable of much, and was living an unhappy life. Once I started on this journey and started reading these inspiring and insightful books, it truly changed the way I think about myself, others, and the world. They helped me have more of a growth mindset and self-awareness and have helped challenge me to become more. It is also not a coincidence that the majority of successful people read these kind of books. In our business, we always say leaders are readers. If you want to improve your life and become successful and happy, reading is arguably one of the most important things you can do. And it's so easy. If I told you that you could start improving your life just by reading 10 pages a day, would you do it? Personally, I like to read a minimum of 10 pages a day, but you can read as much as you want. I used to not track my reading, but during 75 Hard, you have to read 10 pages of a nonfiction book daily, so I started doing that and have continued to do so for the most part. It was also a goal of mine this year to read at least 12 books, one for each month, and I'm actually on book 14. I challenge you for 2025 to set a goal for the number of books you want to read. For me, I'm going for 15 nonfiction books and 5 fiction books, since I'd like to start reading those again too. Send me a message on Instagram or tag me in your story and share what your reading goal will be for 2025. I would love to hear it. All right, let's get into the books. I have 13 books to share with you, plus I'll also tell you how I like the book I'm currently reading so far. So starting in January, I started off the year reading The Mountain Is You by Brianna Weist. I read one of her other books last year called When You're Ready, This Is How You Heal, and I absolutely loved it. I really like her writing style, and she has so many good aha moments. I actually want to reread all 3 of the books I've read by her because I think they're so valuable. The Mountain Is You is all about how you can turn self-sabotage into self-mastery. Basically, the mountain represents your obstacles and blocks in life, and the book talks about how to overcome those obstacles to live the life you want to live. It teaches you that you are the only one holding yourself back. I really like her writing style in all her books. It is super easy to read, it's a pretty short book, has a bigger font, there are quite short paragraphs, and it's broken up nicely. This was a fantastic book and had a ton of great information. I would highly recommend this book if you want to live a more fulfilling life. February's book was 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna Weist. My friends and I had a girls' Christmas party yesterday, actually, but I couldn't go because I am sick, but I dropped off my gift and did the gift exchange over FaceTime instead. So for the gift exchange, we did this thing where each person brought something that added value to their year. We each brought 2 of the same gifts, so we ended up going home with 2 different gifts. The gift I brought was this book. I honestly think everyone should read it, but especially women in their 20s and 30s. It is a bigger book and can look a bit intimidating, but honestly, it was still a pretty easy read. It does have a lot of pages, but each chapter is so short and easy to read. Some chapters have normal paragraphs, and others are more in point form. This book, though, was one of my absolute favorite books I've ever read, and every chapter was so valuable. I remember reading this book in an airport when I was traveling back home to see my family, and I had so many different emotions while reading it. Sometimes I'd have to put the book down and just stare off into the distance, thinking about what I just read because it blew my mind so much. Other times I would be crying reading it, or my jaw would just drop. Honestly, many times I don't remember much from books I read, but I remember my exact feelings reading this book. That is how impactful it was. I want to actually reread this book right away, so it'll probably be my first book of 2025. So obviously, I highly recommend this book. I did say women in their 20s to 30s should read it, but honestly, everyone can benefit from reading it. This book is a 10 out of 10 for sure. I actually want to share two of my favorite passages from this book, so I'll share those with you now. Identify the people you always think are judging you. You know how people always say that? People are judging me. I'm worried about what people will think. Most of the time, those people are a faceless crowd that only exist in your mind. In other words, they're you, projected outward. It's what you're judging yourself for. The first step is realizing that the people you worry about don't really exist. The second one is, ask yourself, if the whole world were blind, how many people would I impress? Truly imagine a life in which you could not see things, in which all that exists is how you feel and how you make others feel. In this kind of world, what kind of person are you? And is it for those reasons that perhaps creating a life that looks good to earn other people's love has supplemented having your own? I loved reading this book, and there are so many good nuggets in it, but those are just two of my favorites. The book I read in March was Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen. To be honest, I don't really remember much from this book, but it basically talks about how your thinking is the root cause of your issues. He says in the book that there is no reality, but our reality is based off of our perception of reality. What I got from it was essentially that we can create our own realities, and stopping thinking will change your outcome. It actually is a quite spiritual book. It talks a lot about the universe and how we are in flow and more connected to Source when we are not thinking. I was actually surprised by how spiritual it was because this is actually Paul's book, and he isn't super spiritual. This book had a lot of great information and introduced me to new ideas, but I did find it pretty repetitive, and I didn't agree with some of the things it was saying. I still think it's a valuable book to read, but it wasn't my favorite. In April, I read two different books. The first one was The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. Paul and I actually read this book together since we both had it. It was really fun to read together and talk about it after. This book is about how you can change your life just by simple daily decisions. In each chapter, there were a couple of testimonies from people who have read this book before, since this is the 8th anniversary edition. The testimonies outlined how applying Jeff's principles completely changed their lives. It was definitely really interesting to read these, and I can see how it may change someone's life. Paul and I both read a lot of personal development books, and we both found we didn't really find any new information in this book, but I think if you are new to these types of books or haven't read too many, then it could be really beneficial to you. But we both found we didn't get a ton out of it. There was one story at the beginning of the book that he kept referring back to that I did really enjoy, though. The other book I read in April was Master Your Emotions by Thibaut Meurisse. I could totally be butchering that name. This book talks about how your emotions are not you and gives advice and action steps on how to better manage your emotions. I think this book had a lot of great information, but at times I found it a little difficult to read. I found myself zoning out of it, but that could have just been because of other reasons. I would like to read this book again and see if things change. Sometimes we aren't ready to hear certain information, and it may be more impactful at another time. So I still would recommend this book, especially if you have trouble overcoming negativity and managing your emotions. I did like how it asked a lot of questions and had action steps at the end of each chapter. For May's book, I read When the Body Says No by Gabor. This book was so interesting and I learned so much from it. It is basically about how stress can impact your health. Obviously, we all know this, but he goes in depth about how your emotions and stress can actually play a large role in developing chronic illnesses, including cancer. It really opened my eyes to how crucial it is to manage stress and emotions. I liked how the book talked about the scientific aspect of this correlation and also told stories of his patients. I think it was a good balance because I always have trouble reading books when it's just super informative and scientific with no breaks in between. I think everyone should read this book. It is so fascinating and can truly be life-changing if you take into account what he is saying. In June, I read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I've mentioned this book in another episode, so you may have heard me talk about it before. This book is so eye-opening and intense, and I did not want to put it down. Like I've said before, I always thought David Goggins was too intense for me, but I gave the book a chance anyway, and I'm so glad that I did. I have so much respect for him now and understand more why he is the way he is. He shares his story from childhood to now and all the horrendous and courageous things he went through. His story is so incredible and really makes you realize you truly are capable of anything, regardless of your circumstances. This book was so motivating for me to read as I read it during 75 Hard, and it really helped me believe in myself more. I think this is one of the most impactful books I've ever read. Many times after reading a book, I have trouble remembering a lot of the content in the book, but this one I remember so clearly. I highly, highly recommend this book, especially if you struggle to believe in yourself or hold yourself back because of your circumstances. I can't say it enough how much I love this book. For July, I read Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be by Steven Pressfield. This is a very short, easy read. I am a little picky when it comes to writing styles, and to be honest, I didn't love his writing style in this book. Don't get me wrong, I think a lot of the information in the book was great, and no, he has written other amazing books, but the writing style was too distracting for me. It's basically just little passages, like one paragraph for each chapter, and it's probably just a me thing because Paul really liked this book, but I just couldn't get past it. This could definitely just be me being picky though, so don't let that deter you. Do I think this book is worthwhile to read? Maybe. It's pretty easy and fast to read. It only took me like a week or two, and I probably could have read it even faster if I was reading more. But it definitely was my least favorite book that I read the entire year. In August, I read It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolynn. This book is about ancestral trauma and how it can impact our lives. This book was so interesting. If you listened to my episode about my spiritual journey, you would know that I went to a women's festival over the summer and did a workshop on ancestral trauma. This was kind of my first introduction to it, although I had heard about it before, but never explored deeper what it was and how it could affect us. So after the workshop, I was really inspired to learn more about this subject. I bought this book and it was really fascinating. It really opened my eyes to think more about where some of my fears, emotions, and other issues really come from. Like, I have certain fears that I have no idea where they came from because I don't personally have any traumatic experiences around those things. So it made me think about my family and that perhaps those fears come from past family members' trauma. It's not all super spiritual either. He talks a lot about genetics and how trauma can affect your genes. It is so interesting, and I really would like to learn more about it too. I think it can have a very powerful impact on your life, and I think everyone would benefit from reading it. Even if it seems like a wild concept to you, I think being open to the idea and at least giving it a try will really open your eyes. I liked how he used science in the book, so it's not just all woo-woo with no scientific evidence. So I definitely recommend this book. For September, I read 2 books again as they were both pretty short and easy reads. The first one is called The Code, The Evaluation, The Protocols by Jocko Willink. This is another one of Paul's books. It's less than 100 pages, and the font is huge, and there isn't much on each page. As I mentioned, I don't normally love this type of writing style, but for this book, I didn't mind it as much. I think the information was more beneficial to me, and it covered a lot of different things. Sometimes personal development books I find to be very repetitive, but this one had a lot of different topics, and I didn't find it to be too repetitive. It covered relationships, personal development, character building, leadership, discipline, and much more. So I liked this book. I think it had valuable information, and it's a super easy read. I think it only took me a couple days to finish it. I'll probably end up rereading it in the future as well. The other book I read in September is called Why Now is the Time to Crush It, Cash In on Your Passion by Gary Vaynerchuk, or as many people know him as Gary V. This book is about finding your passion and turning that into a career or side hustle. I liked this book. I think it had a lot of great information in it and was very motivating to start your own business. Some of the things were a bit outdated, like he talks about social media, and I think this is when Facebook first started to get popular, so he talked about that and Tumblr. But I just kind of pretended those things were Instagram and TikTok now. So the information was still super valuable. If you're wanting to start your own business or have a passion that you don't know what to do with, I would definitely recommend this book. I think his videos on social media are also fantastic. In October, I finished Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. I had started this book earlier on in the year, but had to take a couple breaks from it. It is a very big book with a lot of information in it. I think this is a fantastic book. It was just a little difficult for me to read at times. There was a lot of scientific terms and a lot of talk about brain functions, and that has always been something I've struggled with to learn. I do think I'm getting better at it, but this was hard at times for me to comprehend. However, I still really enjoyed this book, and it was very interesting to me. This book is about how ordinary people have the capability to become supernatural. So again, very scientific, but he also tells the stories of patients and clients he's seen that have completely changed their lives. It's about how anyone is capable of accessing a higher state of consciousness. He has a lot of different meditations I believe you have to buy online, but the stories he told of people who did these meditations and it literally cured their chronic pain or depression or whatever else it may be is incredible. So I would recommend this book, but if you're like me, you may have to take breaks and read other books at the same time, or it may become overwhelming. But if you love learning about that kind of thing, then this book will be great for you. November's book was Understanding Modern Spirituality by Segal. This book had a lot of different components to it about spirituality. In the beginning of the book, it said you can read it all at once or find the subject you're interested in and read that chapter. I think I would recommend just reading the chapters that are of interest to you. Some of the things she was saying were a bit too woo-woo for me, and that says a lot coming from me because I am very spiritual and believe in a lot of different things. But some of the things she talked about were a bit overwhelming to think about. She does have great practices at the end of the book for different things you want to work on, like healing, self-love, trauma release, ancestral trauma release, shadow work, forgiveness, and more. So I think if you were to read this book, don't read it front to back like I did. Just find the things you want to learn about and read that. I think when I want to work on specific things, I will refer to the end of the book where she has those processes to do. I am currently reading The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. I have been recommended this book so many times, and my new therapist has spoken about this book with me before too. This book talks about new scientific research that shows how trauma can affect your brain and your body. It is so interesting to read. I tried reading this book a few years ago, and I only got 20 pages in and stopped. I'm not sure why I didn't like it at the time, but maybe I just wasn't ready to hear those things at that time. Now I literally don't want to put it down. I find it so fascinating. I like how he talks about the science behind it and also shares his patient stories. I mentioned this earlier, but I really like when authors do this so it isn't as dry. Although I actually find the scientific parts of this book extremely interesting. I'm not super far into the book, but I'm really excited to keep reading it. I think it will be very beneficial for me to understand my own trauma and how that can affect me. I already highly recommend this book, and I've only ever heard good things about it, so I know it continues to be a good read. So those are all the books I read in 2024. I mentioned I want to reread a couple of these books, and I also want to read new books in 2025. I actually asked for a couple of Colleen Hoover books for Christmas because I read one of her books before and loved it. I don't read a lot of fiction, but I'd really like to read more of them. I also asked for Happy Sexy Millionaire by Stephen Bartlett because I've heard great things about that too, and I want to read more financial books as well. In addition to those, I'd like to read Never Finished by David Goggins, Mindset by Carol Dweck, both of which Paul has, and The Energy of Money by Maria Nemeth. Going through all the books I read this year, I came to the realization I want to get more out of the books I read. So going forward, I'm going to write a little summary of what I learned and what I thought of the book when I finish reading it. I may also start highlighting. Paul always highlights his takeaways from books, but the perfectionist in me has always struggled with that. I am so afraid of ruining it, I think. But it is super effective, and then when I look back on the book, I can read the parts I highlighted and see what stood out to me. So next year when I talk about the books I read for 2025, maybe I will have even more insights on the books I read. I would also love to hear your suggestions on what books I should read in the new year and hear your thoughts if you read any of the books I shared with you today. If you have any questions or want to share your thoughts, feel free to message me on Instagram at growthroughit.pod. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, I would super appreciate if you would rate and review this podcast and share it with someone you think would benefit from it. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully I didn't butcher too many of the authors' names. But I appreciate your patience, and please remember that you are worthy. See you next time.